and the way.
Okay, I'm beginning the recording, so everything you've said so far is off the record.
Oh, good.
But not that anybody pays attention or that anybody's going to see this or hear it other than us.
I mean, about those jerks and all that stuff.
All those jerks, you're right. And George, we see your name, George Ferrick.
Yes, I'll join you in a few minutes. I just wanted to log in.
He's
So
taking
I'll
a shower.
Yeah, I'm just finishing up. I'll be with you shortly.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, well, welcome, Fred. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you.
Bob
Nice to
number
see you
2
guys.
or number 1, whichever.
I'm
Bob
Bob B.
Bob B and Bob C. Yeah, B and C.
Let me change my name here for you, so you don't get us confused.
All right, Bob Bonnot and Bob Charpentier. You got it.
And so Bob B, what are you going to call yourself if you change your name?
There it is.
Oh, you
Bob
just
B.
did, Bob B.
Looks like Bob B is in the
Yeah.
in the.
Because Bob Charpentier has to be Bob C.
That's it.
Yeah.
Bob C.
Twins.
Is that related to the Bobbsey twins?
Well,
Oh,
it's a shot.
Welbers.
Yeah.
Jeez.
I don't think
Bob. Tom.
That was bad.
I don't think I'm gonna go there.
You may be glad I refrained from saying that.
Oh, it
Well,
takes
Fred-
a brave man even to admit having had to refrain from saying that.
Have you guys been following Pope Francis as his journeys around Canada?
Yes.
Yeah.
A bit.
Pretty impressive, in my opinion. Pretty impressive.
You know, I read something. It's always, not always, but very often, he says something and it's too much for some people and it's too little for others.
Yeah, of
I thought
course.
he was great. I thought he was just great.
Of course. When you're being criticized by both sides, that's probably when you're more or less on the right track.
I guess.
I think so.
And so I have a question for you, Roman scholars. There was a reference that I didn't have time to look up about some sort of, I took it to mean some sort of papal approval of colonizing the Americans, colonizing, the new world, and that certain means were acceptable. And they referred to some bull, a B-U-L-L. Was there something that was going on in the Middle Ages on the part of the Pope? I know he divided South America up between Spain and Portugal, but was there any other overt commentary by the Pope that sort of gave the Europeans kind of free rein in the New World?
I think it covered north and south. It's discovery something, and I'm blanking on what the full title of the document was, but I think it was the whole world that Europe was discovering.
Okay.
Yeah, and basically, I think he was tacitly approving all of it. How much, what to do with the people who were discovered, well, they were sort of like virgin territory for evangelization. Evangelization by the sword and by the chain as much as evangelization by the word.
Does that include the white man's burden?
Probably.
Well, I don't, but Fred, I don't know what is the burden of conversion that you have to carry on your shoulders, or the burden of civilizing. I mean, I've heard that term, the
second.
white man's burden,
I think
but I
the
never
second.
knew.
The
Okay.
second, civilizing.
Okay, yeah.
But I think they were also conscious of you know, the great command at the end of John's Gospel to go forth to all nations and to baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, so help you God.
Yeah,
And
whether or not you want it or not.
yeah. But of course, the assumption was, hi, Gary, the assumption, I think, you know, for Europeans at that time was we are superior to everybody else. So naturally, any right-thinking person would want our civilization and our religion and have, and I think this was probably behind a bit of it, and live prosperously under our benign dominance.
All right.
And, you know, I think that sounds so stupid to us now, except a lot of people are buying that, as we see from Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
But,
That's
you know, at
exactly.
that time, it seemed very, very logical that, you know, if they are any kind of human beings, they will accept us as superior to them. And if they don't, well, that means that they're inferior human beings.
Did anyone catch the news hour, PBS News Hour last night?
I did.
You did. Toward the very end of the piece on the Pope in Canada, at the Mass, a group held up the sign, and I think that's probably what someone referred to
What we're
earlier.
referring to, yeah.
And it got my attention enough to say, oh my God, you know, it's a little bit like the question you're asking now. What policy, what papal bull established that? Who knows how many centuries ago, but in the best of the Napoleonic Code on which canon law, if I remember correctly, is based, laws are not tossed out. A new law is simply added and it overrides it in a sense. And when I saw the sign, I went, they may be talking to canon lawyers. They may know something.
What did the sign say?
What was the sign? Yeah.
It said rescind the doctrine, I think.
Rescind the doctrine, yeah.
Rescind the doctrine.
I haven't looked, I haven't read it yet. I just
Yeah.
glanced through it this morning. I get America Online, you know, I mean, and every morning you get an email.
Mhm.
And there's something about, there was some sort of papal bull or something.
Discovery doctrine,
Huh?
Yeah,
discovery doctrine.
discovery doctrine. And the
Oh.
Pope divided between East and West with that famous line that more or less divides Brazil from the rest of South America as to who could be, whether it was Portuguese or Spanish.
But it allowed like replacing the culture with the, is this something like that? I didn't look real closely at it. I didn't, but it had something to do with the culture or converting people and.
Yeah. Well, I haven't read it again either. I remember reading that papal bull way back when, but you know, it didn't have to state explicitly what was the assumption of every single European power at that time.
Which was?
Which was discovery belongs to us. Which was, you know, the only civilization that is worth anything, or the only real civilization that exists is European civilization. And therefore, these folks are savages, and we don't have to know anything about where they're coming from, what their life is before us, because it is a given that we are superior to them.
Let me read you this. So this is, the doctrine of discovery emerged during the age of exploration. In 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, no idea what that's like, okay, which authorized Portugal to conquer non-Christians and consign them to perpetual servitude.
Mhm.
His successors issued additional bulls confirming or expanding the Portuguese right to subjugate non-European territories. Pope Alexander VI issued the bulls of donation, justifying Spain's claims to the lands of discovered by Columbus. So all of these bulls, I'm reading, there were about 5 or 6, allowed the servitude of the natives.
Yeah.
Who's the guy that did Passion of Christ?
Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson. He did a show years and years ago about the subjugation of people in Central America. It was just incredibly bloody and violent and probably pretty close to true to life. And it was just scary as hell to see what Europeans had authority to do, the authority from God to do almost.
Yeah,
so I think Pope Francis is really, he's out there on a limb on this trip to Canada. I mean, he's essentially saying it was wrong, and that the whole colonization of native peoples was wrong.
Yeah.
So more.
There's an interesting precedent in this. Did anybody read John Allen this morning in Crooks? Because he made a parallel between Francis and, well, actually, he made I'm going up around a blind alley, because he made the parallel between Francis and John Paul II in Jerusalem in 2000. But there is a real parallel, I think, between Francis and the meeting of Pope Paul VI with Athenagoras, where they mutually lifted the excommunication that had been in place since, the 11th century, 1054, I believe.
I think you're right.
Yeah, 1050.
Yeah, but,
The Eastern.
that was sort of a historical cleanup. It didn't really do anything to change anything, except it sort of took an old, nobody ever paid attention to it anymore, but took that kind of off the books. In some ways, I think what they may be asking for is a historical cleanup of the roots of this domination of the native peoples that they were, that Francis is apologizing for. In other words, if you're going to apologize, go back to the roots and heal the roots. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, because some of the initial reactions when he first, I think after his first day, some of the people said this is wonderful. A few other native leaders said this is not enough. They have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's what they were referring to. And by the way, I looked at that thing from America, and it is about the doctrine of discovery. That is precisely what they said.
Mm.
So Christian nationalism goes back a long way.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Yeah, whoever pointed out that Rachel Maddow, I saw the clip that was about, what was that guy? I forget his name. In the 19...
Gerald Smith.
Gerald K. Smith.
Okay, Smith.
Do you remember him running, George Crook, in your readings on Roosevelt? Do you remember reading about him in the 44 election? I didn't. I thought mainly it was Dewey that was the main Republican guy.
I remember Gerald L.K. Smith, but I think of him as a 1930s figure, rightly or wrongly.
So that would beg you back in the Father Coughlin era.
Yeah. Bad guy,
Mm-hmm.
as was Father Coughlin.
Mm-hmm.
God, yeah.
As was Joe McCarthy a few years later.
And Joe McCarthy was a Catholic and a good friend of Joe Kennedy Sr., who contributed to his campaigns. He came to, he dated, I think, one of the Kennedy girls, Eunice, and came to one of their weddings as an invited guest. You know, in Massachusetts in the 50s, it was fashionable to be anti-communist. That was before Fred Lawrence got there.
He
I was
was
going
a,
to say,
he was a certified Catholic alcoholic too.
Yes, he was.
mhm.
Yes, he was.
Well, didn't Bobby Kennedy work pretty hard for him?
He was on his staff.
Yeah.
I don't know if he campaigned for him. McCarthy was just a jolly old soul who thought it was hilarious to say, you know, I've got the names of 47 communists on this piece of paper. And there's some reporter said, let me see that, Senator. He said, oh, you know, I just made it up. But he thought it was hilarious. He was proud of himself.
What was Roy Cohn's role?
Staffer.
But not idea person?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I don't think McCarthy had idea people.
You know, when you see what's going on today in Congress, and you listening to you, Crook, about the McCarthy era, you know, we just don't learn. It seems that every so many years we repeat the cycle of stupidity and meanness and taking on people without any regard to their reputations. Gosh, it's sad.
I
Yeah.
remember what do you call it? Great courses. One of the great courses back in before they were published in video. There was one course on the lessons of history, and the lecturer, and I forget his name now, was really a little bit of an odd sort of guy, said, you know, time and time again, history proves that the first lesson of history is we do not learn from history.
Yeah. Well, that's Barbara Tuchman's book, right? The March of Folly.
Yeah, that's right.
Did Frank Daly say he's not coming today?
No, he's doing a burial. I talked to him this morning, and he said he'll be here doing an interment.
Let me ask you this: Fred, are you and George Ferrick on the same planet?
I think we are. In fact,
Your background.
Oh,
we're
Well,
working on the same planet.
We're both out of this world.
How did you meet?
It could be the case that when we were at NAC, American College, we were both called Spacey.
Yeah. By the way, I'm going to go there in late October for a 4-week. There's a 4-week program.
Oh, really?
At the NAC, some old seminary, some old priest friends that I met on the first sabbatical at NAC. A guy named George Moran, who's in Frank's diocese, and a guy named Ned Ryan, who's the Diocese of Brooklyn, called me about 3 weeks ago, and they're taking this 4-week course called The Passion in Renaissance Art in Rome and in Venice. I mean, it's just a little. I mean, you know, we're going to tour churches and take a trip to Venice. It's a 4-week program at the NAC. So I'm going to go back to Rome and live not as a tourist, but live there for about 4 weeks.
Oh, that
Should
should
be fun. I
Yeah.
envy you.
terrific.
Looking forward to it.
Sounds like a boondoggle.
It is.
I know it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet you there'll be.
The schedule is very relaxed, and if it's anything like what I did when I was there in 2002, every evening they have what they call Chena, all the seminarians gathered in the priests. But 4 of us, we went out to a restaurant every night. We explored Roman restaurants, so it was lovely. Yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah,
Well, that's
so
the only reason to go there is to eat.
That's right.
Not
No other
stall
reason.
the art. not
Yeah.
all the history.
Yeah,
I mean, well, you see two churches, you've seen them all.
that's exactly
Yeah.
right, George. There was one, I remember one time my friend Harry Gregg from Lake Charles, we had a guy named Paul Chaffee, a Jesuit, who was actually a patrologist, giving us courses on the liturgy. And but he knew he would take us to all these churches to see the pagan roots of those, the columns and stuff like that, the temples. That's I remember we had a tour of the Villa Borghese at 5 o'clock one evening, and it was when you go to a museum and you get 7 inch, she was very good, but after about an hour your mind goes on quit because it's just so much overload. And I remember we came out of the Villa Borghese after this 2-hour thing, and Harry Gregg says, "Gary," he says, it's 7 o'clock, the churches are open. I said, "Harry, no more churches." I said, "I want a drink."
Yeah.
We went down the Via Veneto, and I said, "Harry, there's your bar. Let's go in and get a Negroni." So
Harry's Bar and Grill.
Harry's bar is on the Via Veneto. Yeah.
Gary, can I come? You and I got our start
Yes.
European travel together.
Yeah. Well, you could, Tom, you go to the North American College's website, and then they have the ICTE, the ICTE, Institute for Continuing Theological Education. And you go there and they'll tell you about it. I think it might be a little late though. When I signed up, they were saying they needed to know because they're getting tickets for Venice. Anyway, it's a vacation, and
Yeah, but I was very tongue in cheek there, but
yeah, I know.
but
So, Gary, you
that
should-
was an interesting time we had in 1966.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
But to go to Venice on that kind of a trip and skip Florence? I mean,
Well,
what the heck?
I'm thinking of going about a week earlier. I have a cousin in Viareggio who has been very good to me every time I've gone back to Italy, and he's retired. He just retired. He was a neurologist in that area, and he just retired and has pancreatic cancer. So I want to
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah.
see him. So what I thought I might go for maybe a week early and then kind of go to all the places I used to kind of roam around in, like Florence and Porto Venere and places like that in that area. So, but anyway,
Have any
Gary,
of
have
you
you
been to-
ever traveled with Paul Dodson?
no, Paul.
Must be
No,
an
I've never
experience.
traveled with Paul. I've thought about it, but when I was working, I never had the time. Paul seemed to be gone a lot, but he loves to travel. I mean,
Yeah.
he can jump. God.
Here comes Frank.
Oh, here we go. Oh, good. Yeah. There. Oh, good. Wonderful.
We have a precursor.
While you're talking about Europe, have any of you been to Barcelona? I'm going to be there in November. I'm chaplaining a cruise from Barcelona down to Barbados, but I want to go and see Sagra Familia, most especially. But if any of you have been there and have any tips on how to make best use of time, we'll be there. But my brother and I will be there for maybe 4 or 5 days before we get on the ship, and then it's gone. So I'd welcome any tips you have with regard to that.
You mean
So,
this-
Bob,
you mean
I
the-
would recommend the other Gaudí places, like the homes and other anything by Gaudí to take in.
Thank you.
I'm-
Yeah,
He's the one that built the church.
Right.
Okay, and
He's the one.
homes.
He's the one that started it, but
Yeah,
they're still working on it.
they are.
and an interesting little sideline too. Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills. A block from there is a home designed and built totally in the Gaudí style.
Yeah, like curves and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, all of that, and you walk past it and you think, oh my God, a little bit of Barcelona right here. It's right next door to the Presbyterian Church.
Bob, you'll see plenty of Gaudi stuff in Barcelona. It's but it's easy to get to,
Okay.
And Bob, there's a type of dance called Las Rondas. Rondas. That's that they do in public at squares and so forth, maybe in the late afternoon or whatever, but that's worth viewing or participating in.
Great. Any further tips anybody has, I welcome.
Hey, Frank, how are you?
Good, Tim. Thank you. Sorry I'm late. I had an interment.
Not
It
your own.
wasn't you that got interred, though. That's good.
Tim told us.
I suppose it's an appropriate day to do it on the feast of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus.
Yeah. It's a great day.
You should stick around for the aftermath of that one.
Yeah.
Which, the aftermath of the interment?
Yeah, maybe he'll follow Lazarus's example.
Come
Well,
on. Great.
Actually, after this, I'm going to the house for the reception, so I'll see if there's anyone there.
If he's come back.
Did you plant some seeds, Frank, of
Oh,
conversation you'd like to have?
It was yes. I was with the family before I did the funeral months ago. So it's it's in a columbarium. The
Mhm.
cremains in a columbarium today. So.
Mhm.
I had now that Frank's here, I had some comments on Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
good.
Well, what I thought about last night when I couldn't go to sleep was the doctrine that John Courtney Murray was opposed to. And it really was embodied in the Franco regime in Spain, when the church and the state were more or less one, probably more than less. And the idea was, and it was espoused by the Vatican, is that error has no rights.
No rights.
And so Christian nationalism is a successor to that.
Right.
So and I thought the example of getting rid of Roe v. Wade was an example of that. Not that abortion is right, but people have the right to do it, perhaps, even though from the point of view of those who are making the laws, it's not right. And also because of faith and morals. But still, that would be an instance.
That's been a question on my mind. Ned, is that your son who comments every so often?
Yes,
Oh, that's his son. Yeah.
Mark.
We've been talking about abortion. I mean, sooner or later, there's a human person there. I mean, I don't know when or whatever. And I obviously cannot, I don't believe in it, but I do wonder at this point about, whether it should be declared illegal. I mean, there's another article, I was going to send it out to everybody and I hadn't updated my mailing list, but it's an America online thing. Some woman wrote about, and you've seen, I think, George, Ferrick, you've already pointed that out in that lady's that story in Texas,
10-year-old girl.
that the way the laws are being written, that people can't even have access to procedures that the church would approve of if the laws are not clear. I mean, and there was an article, and I forget where I read it, about a woman. This is what turned everything in Ireland, when there was some woman who was pleading for an abortion, and the nurse, whoever it was, said, "You're in a Catholic country," and she died, and that's what eventually sparked the uproar in Ireland when they finally banned.
Right.
Not only did she die, Gary, but it was obvious.
Oh, she did die, George. She did die.
No,
Yep.
I said that.
Not only.
Okay. Oh, not only. Okay.
Yeah, not only did she die, but it was perfectly obvious medically leading up to her death that she was gonna die absent an abortion. You know, it was
Wasn't
perfectly,
the baby dead
perfectly
already?
obvious. I
George?
think the baby was dying.
Okay.
I
And you
think,
need to
Frank.
wait. until
But
the guy-
because they had the slightest fetal heartbeat, they
Yeah.
couldn't do anything, and it was very faint. And that, yeah, she was actually of Indian,
Right.
and married to the former Prime Minister of Ireland. His name was Varadkar. His parents were Indian, or his father was. So, yeah, that generated the thing in Ireland.
I mean, it was just national revulsion at the Catholic Church as a result of that one instance. And how could it have been otherwise, really?
Well, it was like the woman in the NPR interview, Gary, I think you were referring to, that, you know, she couldn't be declared a medical emergency because her temperature didn't get to 104.1 or something. In other words, you almost have to be dying before. They won't do it when you're almost dying, but when you're dying, then you can do it, but then it's too late. It's really ridiculous.
For the knackers, I have a vague recollection of Joe Fuchs coming into like the first moral theology or second moral theology class of the year. And he began talking about the experience he had working as an orderly, dressed in the way orderlies do. And I believe it was in Germany.
Yeah, it would be.
Of being in an abortion clinic and listening to the stories. I don't recall the details of the stories other than they were so human and
So what?
human.
Yeah.
Like this story, the background here, George, if I remember, this account you're talking about, that NPR, this happened in Texas, right? This
Right, yeah.
more recent one. And he just started talking about not the morality of it, not the ethics of it, but how he was feeling listening to these women telling these stories of why they were having these abortions. And all I remember in that context, I may have conflated a few things, but I guess I'm tossing it out because George, I think you would have been there. Bonnot, I think you might have been there in that class. But all I remember was the feelings I had, which was sort of triggered by his accounting of this very human response and reaction, no judgment of morality, no conversation about how sinful or anything else, but was just listening to the horrendous stories. And what triggered this recollection, and I don't think I created it, I might have conflated it with a couple of other things, memory and all that. But what I'm sure of was the feeling that he shared with everybody else as a way of saying this whole issue related to abortion is an incredibly complex issue. And then I jump to the present time, and I'm thinking, and I'm remembering the headdress of the pontiff in Canada. That, and I looked online, that is a mighty chief's headdress. I don't know if any of you were struck by those pictures, but that is like a supreme chief's headdress. The quality of the eagle feathers in that baby is something else. And so they identify him, and this is the guy who has said in another context, who am I to judge? You know, this is with regard to the issues of homosexuality, but who am I to judge? And the trigger for me was that image of Francis asking the forgiveness of the people. This was a person to person situation. And back to that setting, and I was a student there at NAC in the moral theology class with Fuchs talking about his very human experience. And as I recall, there were also from way back up in the Allah, I mean, that people talked about the tears in his eyes as he was recounting how painful it was for him to hear these different stories, but that the bottom line was, don't judge. He didn't say that, but he said that. Don't judge. This is a very complex situation. I guess where I might be at finally is sort of like the situation in Texas. How much have you read about, from our leaders in the church at this particular time? Sort of don't judge.
Well,
If I'm not mistaken, and Bob, maybe you can verify this, I have a memory of Fuchs in which he said that in a conscience and moral decision, there are two decisions that are made. And the first one's fallible. That is it right or wrong? And the second one is infallible. I'm going to do it because it's right, or I'm not going to do it because it's wrong. Does anyone remember that?
See,
I don't remember it, but my own sense, which probably is grounded in Fuchs, I never was a specialist in moral theology, but I think, we have to follow our conscience. What our conscience tells us is what we have a right to do, and if we violate our own conscience, we are doing damage to ourselves. And I think that's a Newman affirmation, that he says that very clearly. It's in writing. I don't know what we have in Fuchs, which, by the way, I'm digging up all my next stuff from what's been booked in boxes. And I think I have Fuchs's moral theology book, so I'll have to look this up. But it seems to me that's what you're talking about, Frank, is that we have to think it through, and we have to come to a judgment within ourselves that it's right or it's wrong for me in the situation that I'm in. And when we say, this is what, much as I might not want to do it, this is what I have to do, and they have to live by that. That's infallible.
Right.
Yeah, and the woman in Texas wanted to have this child. She was
Yes.
pregnant. She did not want to have an abortion. So you can just see the dilemma that she was facing.
Yeah, I can almost feel when they place this dead, cold, beautiful corpse of her child on her breast, and she had a chance to hold it and love it. The reporter caught that beautifully in terms of sharing how she was feeling as best that the reporter could, but it must have gone considerably deeper, that she really wanted. This was a wanted, loved human being. Yeah. Which makes the whole thing even more complex.
Can I just interject a little sidebar here? Bishop Barron's installation in Winona, Rochester has just completed as we speak. And for those of us who were ordained by Frank Ray, it breaks our connection to Barron because he was the titular bishop of Macriana in Mauritania, which Frank Ray was when he ordained us. So we are set free from Bishop Barron.
Hallelujah.
Just a slight different sidebar is I'm feeling a rather unusual pang of envy for you knackers, because while you were having Joe Fuchs, we were having Doc Tolman.
Yes, yes.
Who was he?
Who was he?
Oh,
He was a how would you describe him? He was one of the several Vincentians that the province basically sent out to St. John's to retire and die. And he had zero abilities as a teacher.
Oh.
He would come in and get distracted, usually about some kind of case of rape, where the guy says your money or your virginity or your life, and or it was
I remember when he said, Tim, his method, as I look back on it now, it's what David Shaw used to call his slay a day method. How do we get through the day? Slay a day. We'll just go through this one. What I remember him saying was something in the confession, the priest asked the woman or whoever it was, did you entertain these thoughts? And the person said, no, Father, they entertain me. That I remember.
so that is the depth of our moral
And that was
theology.
it. That's like as deep as
Oh my gosh.
I think we had to read on the sly, people like Fuchs and what was the other bit? Herring.
Herring, yeah.
We had to read those on the sly, sort of under the covers with a flashlight.
I was
Charlie Curran probably had some writing then too. By the time you guys were, maybe not.
Yeah,
Maybe-
he did, I think.
I was really impressed by Fuchs.
Yes.
In fact, he became my confessor for my first year at NAC.
Yeah.
And it was only after I had heard some talks by Warren Halloran that I shifted over to Warren.
Yeah.
But I thought he was an absolutely wonderful person.
He
Yeah.
was. I agree.
When I went back in about the year 2000 and taught for a semester at the Greg, I was up in the faculty room, and by God, he remembered me.
Mhm.
He was
Wow.
retired, but he did remember me, and I was thrown for a loop by that. It was wonderful. He was wonderful.
I thought so too. He was a complete human being, I thought.
Yes.
Yeah, that was my sense.
He was a great priest, I thought.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my sense of him is that he was together.
Right,
Yeah, he was a very real human being.
Right. right.
Yeah.
Can I?
Theologia moralis.
Fred, what did you say?
Theologia moralis, the way Germans pronounce the Latin, changing the R's to W's.
Hmm.
But he was,
Wallace.
yeah, moralis.
Oh, Morales.
Yeah, yeah. But at any rate,
Well, Frank, was there any consequence or following conversation or comment after his experience in talking with those folks that were telling their stories, the ladies that were telling their stories about abortion?
I do not know.
That's kind of my question, Ned, is that, all these stories that we hear now, like that person in Texas, I know there's a number of principles in Catholic moral theology that, like there was that whole question in Arizona with in Phoenix when what's his name
Olmsted.
Yeah.
Created
Just crazy.
the nun
Yeah.
for a procedure that a moral theologian on their panel said was ethical, that you could do that. I mean, so but it seems to me that if Catholic moral theology, I wonder if it could cover all these really horrendous issues that we read about, like that first. What about that girl, the 10-year-old girl that was raped? I mean, are there principles of moral theology that would allow for something like that, or would that be one that escapes any moral principle?
You know, I wonder, obviously, that experience that Father Fuchs had was so raw, so heartfelt, that he described what he experienced so well too. And you know, there's a whole lot of converging here for me. What is, again, pastoral theology? I looked up a little bit, you know, and Benedict had written about pastoral theology and talking about the truth and love coming together and making an attempt at some kind of guidance when the truth and the sense and feeling of love needed to be somehow both honored and respected, and a decision needed to be made. It's and further judgments that we make. You know, we're on one side or another, and you know, I just have a lot of trouble. George and I were talking about this yesterday or day before. I think my son Gary, whom you mentioned, I put him in one of the messages to all of you because I wanted him to experience some of the stuff that we were talking about. He's got a PhD in computer science with a specialization in IT. What is it?
AI.
AI, that's right.
Artificial intelligence, yeah.
And he's extremely bright, and went to work at Google and became a board member there and couldn't handle it because of the what he considered to be godlessness of so many of the people up on top. And then he went to work for a capital group, which is a very, very I'm told under the radar, huge manager of trillions of dollars. And he's having trouble there too. But, you know,
internally, they're unhappy with it.
Internally, and to some extent, you know, in Google, several people came to him and said, you know, you're so bright. How can you possibly believe in God? How can you possibly think that there's some coordinates outside yourself that would guide you invariably to make certain decisions? And at Capital Group, there's also folks like that. I mean, I think they're all over the place now, and you know, truth and love. How does that happen? Anyway, I'm sorry.
Ned, I think the thing is they're not outside yourself.
Oh, well, of course, they're brought into our being, and those are the coordinates or the values, the principles with which we make decisions, because they are so deeply part of us. But he, you know, I'm really convinced that 90% of consciousness is in the unconscious, and our decisions, our outward judgments are made from that 90% that's unconscious rather than the conscious. And Mark has now incorporated into himself, it seems to me, this computer-like reality that everything's got to be consistent. You know, no zero or no one can be out of place. And it's from there that he sees the world. And it's difficult for him to, I mean, he feels the pain. He's very, very compassionate. But his answers are invariably according to a more, a less nuanced understanding of Catholic principles.
Ned, could I add one thing to what you're saying?
Sure.
You know, as you're talking, I was thinking about the same thing, because computers, you know, they're for accuracy, right? And uniformity.
Yes.
Isn't that, yeah,
Absolutely.
mathematically. But there's kind of abstract truth, and then there's existential truth.
Yes.
And I think, Bob, your idea of Fuchs, he was experiencing the existential situation of the situation. So the abstract truth could say one thing, but the living in the present, it's just not unconscious, but it's being aware of the multitude of circumstances that make up one's reality, you know, incarnate reality.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So, and then how many children does he have?
6.
I think somewhere along the line, one of his children will not turn out the way he wants.
Oh, I'm sure.
You know,
a lot of them.
one of them will
They're
get
boys.
married and maybe divorced. One may turn out gay or lesbian down the line, or who knows, you know, something's going to happen.
Yeah.
And he's going to be faced with his, you know, his guidelines and what he holds very strongly. And he'll have to either through love and compassion accept what's going on, or face his operating principles.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what came to mind. Yeah.
Well, hopefully when that happens, I don't think it's if, I think it's when that happens, he'll be able to become more or less judgmental and more, I don't know how to even characterize it, more understanding and accepting. But still, you know, this convergence, we feel so much pain out there for everyone that has issues, you know, the transgender folks, which have now been turned into, I think, some kind of a craziness. Homosexuals, all of that stuff, gay folk, they have to find a way to live, and they're not machines. So they make decisions, and we need to respect them and not judge.
I don't think Marcos is ever going to be, at least not in the foreseeable future, less judgmental. I think he will come to the same conclusions about what people should and shouldn't do in a situation, and his conclusions are always going to be, call it ultra-Orthodox Catholic. But with his kids, he'll be quite compassionate, I think.
Well, that's exactly right. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm just not saying it correctly, but
he'll be real clear that this is the wrong thing to do, son.
But I love you. I accept you. I have no animosity, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's just the way he is. He's very compassionate, very relational, but also, as George, who knows him, very clear in his mind. On the other hand, our other son, Dan, who's ER doc at UCLA, and Martin Luther King.
And it's so brilliant, they should be naming hospitals after him, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, he's a very bright guy, and he gets. I think he sometimes believes that being, and he's become more cynical than I ever expected him to be. I think sometimes folk who are cynical believe that that's a sophisticated way to address the world with cynicism. He'll be back. He's very, very strong in the faith, but with an aspect or a perspective that Mark just doesn't have, and I don't know that, as George says, he doesn't think he's ever going to have. And so, George, you talk about the existential truth and an abstract truth. Well, I have trouble with existential truth is suffering. It seems to me that's pertinent for us right now. It's suffering. It's being torn apart with contradictions or with wants, with needs, and we've got to have something that helps us make decisions that sometimes aren't consistent with our wants or our feelings. And that's a field that every priest and every Catholic everybody has to deal with. And as they told me in the seminary, which I was really upset about, I couldn't get a graduate degree in psychology because all psychologists want to do is to relieve you of conflict and help you become relaxed and unstressed by whatever is ailing you. That's what I was told. And that's why I couldn't go out there and get a graduate degree in psychology, which I thought would be very helpful in the priesthood. Anyway, I don't know if I've made any sense, but it's just.
I think Bob and I are smiling because I think we see psychologists as trying to relieve people of unnecessary suffering so they can face real suffering that we all find in life.
And didn't Jesus say that?
I'd like to comment on what Ned was saying. Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, distinguishes between different kinds of knowledge. First is wisdom. That's a comprehensive knowledge about everything, of everything, about everything. And then phronesis, he calls practical wisdom. And practical wisdom is the ability to deliberate well, to discern by deliberation and evaluation. And the evaluation has to do with feelings. And then there's techne, which is technical expertise. And that's what AI with its zeros and ones is all about. It's not appropriate for the moral sphere. So I would say that when Aristotle talks about making a decision or about the best course of action among a number of courses of action, that you have to be able to discern by deliberating and evaluating what the best course of action is. Now, moving back to Fuchs' fundamental position was that your fundamental option, your overall orientation, is going to be definitive. It's going to really be the foundation for everything you choose and do. And the fundamental option, which for him was obviously a religious conversion, is basic. So you need to be religiously converted to be morally converted. And you need to be morally converted in order to be intellectually converted. You can't skip the conversion aspect of things.
Yeah.
And because that has so much to do with your whole orientation, what Aristotle called the that for the sake of which you choose and do everything you do.
Yeah.
And the that for the sake of which actually is your God, whatever it happens to be. So try to talk to, is it Dan?
Oh, which one?
Oh, it's Marcos.
Mark.
Mark, the computer guy? Yeah.
Yeah, computer guy. Try to talk to him about these other, and this goes into what George was bringing up about existential. Existential is your fundamental option. It's your orientation in your life, in your overall life, which is based on your fundamental option, which is a function of religious or moral or intellectual conversion. So the existential is first. And that's what is going to determine discernment, deliberation, evaluation. That's why we like Francis so much, because he's living by Ignatius's notion of the discernment of spirits. And he practices this day in and day out. It doesn't mean he's always right, but it does mean that he has a way of thinking about what's right, which is more in line with Fuchs than with other kinds of people, than Tishner, for example. So my spiel is over.
Fred, it would be interesting to know whether Francis had Fuchs as one of his instructors, because he was ordained in 72. Fuchs was still around.
A good question.
Yeah, that is a good question, yeah.
But Francis,
Go to the grave.
Francis never studied in Rome.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
You know, he did, you're right. He did not.
But he did study in Germany somewhat.
Yeah, he was in Germany. That's
Oh,
what
he was banished to Germany, wasn't he?
Yeah. Yes.
And then, you know, finally said to himself, hey, I don't belong here. I got to go back, and never finished his doctoral studies.
Been around even then, so there's a good chance. Speaking of that, does anyone know? And I could look it up, but I'm being lazy here. Does anyone know? Is there a biography of Fuchs out there somewhere? Fred, do you know that? George?
I know that the person who's an ethicist in my department named James Keenan got his doctorate under Fuchs. And I can ask him whether there is such a thing.
If you think of it, that would be of interest to me. On another thought, Ned, you're the kind of wrestling you're doing with your son, and
Both of them.
how nice! Congratulations, Grandpa.
Yeah.
It triggered a thought for me. I remember coming across in a book I was reading by a physicist, and he acknowledged, he said, my own journey hasn't taken me along the path of believing, but I've come across too many colleagues, including Nobel Prize winning physicists, who are believers in God. And then he gave a reference to, and it's an online one, if you ever feel like taking a peek at it, it's 50 Nobel Prize winning physicists who are believers. Yeah. And there's a little blurb and tells their story. And it's really quite fascinating. The connection for me was, in the bench in front of me was one of those at Newman Hall, Holy Spirit Parish in the Newman Center at Berkeley. One of those physicists used to sit on Sunday. And it was just be able to say hello to him, a Nobel Prize winner from Berkeley, who was very definitely a believer, because I remember having some sidebar conversations with him at other gatherings and stuff. But that might be something, you know.
Well, you know, in a conversation that I listened to between Mark and Dan, the topic was why is there such a belief among hoi polloi that science and faith don't meet, aren't consistent with each other? And I asked Dan, you know, the doctor, biologist, et cetera, I mean, doesn't the complexity of a human being, all of those abilities and tools that the human body is given, which are so magnificently integrated, bring biologists to God? He said, no, many biologists are unbelievers. It's the physicists that are getting to God. And Marx said, yeah. And so they began to talk about the chaos theory and all kinds of other things that seemingly aren't consistent with, what is commonly understood as Newtonian physics. And then now we're getting into beyond Newton,
Solid
and
state-
how that, pardon?
solid state physics.
I'm sorry?
Solid state
Yes,
physics.
yes. And how that's bringing physicists to an acceptance of this higher dimension of life that probably is the source of creation. And what is so magnificent, they call it elegant, that there can exist contradictions in our way of thinking that are just very consistent with reality. Anyway.
I find that interesting from a biological point, because I've often wondered, having been in such life or death surgical situations, both myself and with family members, as to whether or not surgeons at some point in what they're doing understand that they're in kind of two different worlds, if you will. And that there's a crossover from the great, like I've had wonderful doctors, enormous technical and mechanical ability, if you will, that they have, and the fact that what they're engaged in at this point is not simply that, but it is life and death. It's something that crosses over into another realm. And that makes me, a little surprised that biologists don't kind of go into that area.
I couldn't believe it. Anyway, that was his take on it.
One thing that's true about physics is that they realize that all their verifications are only probable. So they have to not only make that judgment of fact about the probability of their hypothesis, but also they have to make a value judgment about whether they should pursue that, keep on pursuing that, or move in another direction.
Yeah.
And because they have to make value judgments. It's not that biologists don't, but they don't necessarily advert to it. But physicists have to in a clear way.
Yeah.
I remember coming across the notion of many physicists, the expression, many physicists are closet mystics.
That makes sense to me.
And if you have some conversations, if you have the opportunity to get to know one and they trust you, it's just not chic these days to be a quote believer and to be involved in this kind of fuzzy thinking kind of stuff. Oh yeah. And then the interesting conversation some years back, what was the conversation that went on between the physicist and the mystic? Blanking on their names, but I should remember it was part of the Northern California, Berkeley, San Francisco scene. Fritjof Capra is probably the best name associated with this conversation between quote religionists and physicists.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, I think.
So what would Mark think if he listened to this conversation? I'm not suggesting.
Send it to him.
Oh, this one?
What a good question. Yeah.
Oh, he'd be scandalized.
Oh, I'm not sure, George.
Oh,
Yeah.
the idea that Roman Catholic priests are sitting here saying that abortion's complex and it would have, it should be struggled through and it's a thing of conscience and should not be banned by law.
And
Ned, I don't know. Although he's your son, not mine.
Yeah, maybe 10 years from now.
Yeah, but the one
Yeah.
question that I have is that, you know, all of us at one point or another, I mean, some of us became priests, but every one of us studied, we had a call. We all had something in us that moved us in the direction that we chose at that point. And I fully believe, having been a part of this group, that everybody found the answer to that call, just in different ways. But our desire was always, Jesus said, the truth shall make you free. I mean, so you want to get people to the grounding of their lives, but because you want them to be fulfilled, and you want them to grow. And the question that I'm having simply is that, I mean, with regard to abortion, is what is the best way? How do we help people if these laws, I mean, if these laws prohibit things that we would consider to be legitimate from a religious point of view, then I don't know if it's right. It should be legal or illegal. I mean, that's do you understand? You know what my question is? I mean, I just think that I have no questions with the morality part, but
Let's remember
No.
that error has no rights.
yeah, well, there you are. But I mean, I don't
It
know.
seems like things are going to be worse by thinking you're doing a good thing. Things are going to be much worse.
At least in the short run.
George, think about this. These states, they believe that they want less government, right? Less government in your life. They want to be free of all that stuff. So these states now are not only enacting laws about abortion, they're going to also enact a law. You can't leave the state to go somewhere else. We're going to stop you from going. Now that's incredible interference in a
That's
person.
right.
Isn't
Yeah,
that
they're putting-
happening between Ohio and Indiana at the moment?
Well, no, Ohio didn't have you can't leave the jurisdiction to get an abortion law. They just said there's no exception for rape or incest.
Also in line with what you're saying, Gary, is that I just saw today, I was going to send it to the group, but I didn't want to overload the circuit, that the states that are strongest banning abortion have the least resources for mothers and children.
Yes, yeah.
The very least, budget. They're just, and yet, so what's going on there? Because on the other hand, you have other anti-abortionists say that's what we need to do. We need to do all this good stuff, but it's not being done. It's like it just
It feels like a lazy simplicity to me.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's where the Catholic Church could truly make a difference in this national debate.
Yeah.
I mean, we've always, I mean, people say of the pro-life movement that it's pro-life before birth and indifferent after birth, right? But they don't say that about the Catholic Church. Or if they do, they don't say it accurately. I mean, we have a whole social justice body of doctrine.
the body of doctrine is one thing again, but there's that saying, the map is not the territory.
Yeah.
The territory is what is actually happening on the ground versus the statement.
But look, even I don't know. Just a related question I was having in my mind, Ned, when you were talking about Marcos. He's a quote conservative, close quote. What's more conservative than the doctrine of the natural law? And wouldn't it, and if I vaguely recall it, there were primary precepts of the natural law and secondary precepts. And the secondary precepts were not per se notum, quo ad omnes. Wouldn't our teaching on abortion be a secondary precept, one that we admit, even, the most, I'm trying to think of a word, traditionalist believer on the subject would have to admit is not truly obvious morally to every human being and can't be expected. We cannot expect of every human being that he immediately see that, oh, you can't do this. This isn't right. I mean, it's just, I mean, listen to our debate in this country. I mean, people of goodwill think it's okay to have abortions. You know, they aren't monsters of evil.
Well, let's look at our own group. Everybody in this group, I think, bottom line, we would say it's not okay to have an abortion.
I
But
would
on the
not say
other
that. I would
No,
make
wait a
it
minute. Let me
Go ahead.
finish, George. Don't interrupt.
Okay, go ahead.
But in other words, I don't think we would say that abortion is a moral good to be sought. But viewed within the context of the choices available to an individual, a real question that faces our country is, to what extent should it be limited, or to what extent should civil law come into this? Or to what extent should civil law simply say, we step aside and allow the judgment basically to be up to the individual, assuming that there is good reason for that judgment. But nonetheless, we're not going to intervene legally against forcing this judgment one way or the other. Does that make sense?
I think it
Well, I
does.
think it does.
That's
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
my question. Should it be illegal? I mean, should it be, not that we would recommend it, but should it be?
Should it be illegal? Yeah, so that's
What
the
did-
law question.
What
We're
did
going to
Obama
get to
say?
vote on that, Gary, next month.
Sorry?
George, what did Obama say or was it
No, Clinton.
Clinton?
Clinton.
Clinton.
Safe, legal, and rare.
Yeah.
What? What was this?
Isn't
Safe,
Clinton's,
legal, and rare. That
Did-
was Clinton's famous statement.
isn't this kind of a decision about focus? Those who apparently, to my limited way of looking at things, who focus on the child and say, well, if it's not yet a child, it's human life.
Right, it's gonna get there, right?
And if it's human life, we've got an imperative, and the focus is there. Then there's the other focus, the woman. What's her situation? Is she in dire straits of possible death, or is she just disturbed, doesn't like this, and therefore can make the decision that this is not whatever the decision is about whether that life in there is got any rights. The focus is on the woman and what she wants, and there's a spectrum. Is she in danger of death or grave injury, or is she just she needs to finish school,
Lifestyle.
her doctorate? Pardon me?
Lifestyle.
Yes, lifestyle.
Or is
And so
Plus they get
I
the-
can make up my mind on what I want to do because I have a right. I am a woman, hear me strong, and I've decided that I'm getting rid of this thing because it's an obstacle for
It's
me.
in the way.
Yeah, so there's the spectrum, and if the focus is on the woman and nothing else, then you're going to have one decision and one set of principles by which to make decisions. And I think that's where I have problems. Danger of death, danger of grave injury. Oh my God, that's what makes it complex for me. Not when somebody says, well, gee, I got pregnant because
No.
and I can't handle this because I need to finish school and I need to get my career online, and so throw it out.
Does safe, legal, and rare, when Clinton said that, was extremely popular in the country.
Yeah.
And safe, legal, and rare are minimalist standards. Are they in fact a secondary natural law instinct?
I don't think so.
Say more.
I don't think so.
Well, I mean, if in fact such a large percentage of people in the country, and I mean, if memory serves me right, it was over 70%. It was into the 70% that agreed with Clinton on that. Rather than saying it's a value that should be open to every American who wants it, this is a pullback from that.
I agree.
And does that say that somewhere there's an instinct that this should be limited?
I think so.
I
Well,
agree.
isn't that,
Does that meet your standard of secondary natural law, George?
Well, those who believe it should be limited might not see it as a doubtful law or rule of behavior. But I see it more statistically. In other words, roughly, I forget the percentages, but let's say a third of the American people think there should never be a lawful abortion. A third think they should be handed out like M&Ms. And a third, would have different gradations and different policies, everything from you can have one, but not three, to you could have it the first 3 months, 2 months, 4 months, X months of your pregnancy, but not thereafter. And almost like moral calls, I think. I mean, the center of gravity, I think, is certainly that it should be okay within 12 weeks. We could end this whole debate. That was my big frustration with Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade, by this trimester thing that it came up with, said these trimesters are of constitutional significance. Once the court spoke, it might as well have been written into the Constitution. And you can't compromise, you can't get together and lock Ferrick and Ned or me into a room and say, okay, come out with an answer, guys. You're the philosopher kings. We hereby appoint you as such. Come out with something that'll work. Couldn't have done that. Now we could. I don't know if am I being responsive, Frank, or am I just talking around?
Yeah, I think so, but you're not being responsive in the way that I'm trying to push you.
Well, that's because I'm slick. How are you trying to push me?
I agree with Frank.
Do I think that I think this whole debate affects an ambivalence and argues in favor of a secondary precept of the natural law. We're not debating whether we can murder kids within 3 days of birth, the way Peter Singer would allow us to.
Right.
Yeah, so I think by definition, it's a secondary precept debate, isn't it?
It seems so to me, but
Yeah.
Well, it leaves the question open to prudence.
Prudence?
Yeah, well, it means you have to discern what fits in with safe, legal, and rare.
Right. And how do you like it that this bunch of galoots that we elect out there are making those decisions?
Not well.
Amen, brother. And that's part of the tremendous confusion out there these days and why we're in this terrible situation. And where are we going to look for help with regard to this incredibly painful situation, which comes down to human beings, women kind of look around here and this totally male-dominated group, all of us, where are the women? Where's the feminine input? I wonder what they would be saying if they were part of this conversation, sort of listening in. I'm tempted to share this conversation with one of my women physician friends who I got to know through my wife, and say, what do you think of this conversation as a believer and as a scientist, a medical practitioner all your life and about to retire? What do you think of this conversation in terms
Tell
of
us
So
what you
let me ask this question. You Californians are voting, it's a referendum, as I understand it. And so if you're, Bob C., if you're talking about the idiots in halls of legislatures making the decision,
we got some
every California voter is going to make a decision about it.
And there are
what-
idiots among them.
No, Georgia. But here's my question, because I'm not aware. Are you being subjected? Are you being exposed to some sophisticated conversations leading up to the referendum as to how you might vote? Or is
I
it
don't
all?
think so. Are we? I haven't seen commercials or anything.
Well, I've seen nothing.
Nothing.
When is the referendum?
August.
Was it
Oh.
August?
Oh,
I think so.
And I've seen nothing, nothing seriously,
At all?
nothing serious anyway, out there.
All I've seen is Proposition 27 about some taxing gambling or something or other, online gambling, so it could benefit some tribe. That's all I've seen on television. But I haven't seen anything about this.
Yeah, that's all I've seen.
Same here.
But I mean, I've not seen a thing about. I thought it's going to be in August.
I think
Well,
so.
I'm looking it up. I'm looking it up.
which must mean that the polls are showing that it's going to win hands down, and there's no need to spend all this money.
I saw
November.
some reference saying
Correct,
exactly
correct.
that.
November ballot.
Here in
Oh, it's
California.
November. Oh,
Okay.
it's different.
November ballot. Yeah.
All right.
But I'm
That's
quite
different.
sure that, here, like, look at, I mean, like the California bishop, I mean, be careful what you wish for, like Corleone and my bishop, Bishop Basha. I mean, they're happy as hell that Roe versus Wade was overturned. But now what's going to happen is they're going to end up, California is going to be the abortion mill state, or one of them. Their own people, their own state is going to be where Newsom, they'll fly you in, give you a hotel room. I just can't. I keep saying.
Well, do you think Corleone will petition for a change to Alabama?
I don't know.
No,
You think Alabama
I think he's a
would
fighter,
want-
man.
Throw in my bishop as a little extra. Let the two of them go.
Who's your bishop there?
Basha, Robert Basha. They're all currently at the Meritage Hotel in Napa for the California Institute.
That summer gathering
Yeah.
of
The Napa conference, the
Yeah,
annual Napa
going on.
conference.
Napa Institute.
Apparently
Yeah,
this week.
Tim Bush's group.
Yeah. apparently-
Exactly.
Apparently this week, so.
Well, they don't all go to that.
Weigel and those guys, yeah.
John, you should be there
Talk
recording it
about
all.
Catholic version of Christian nationalism.
Only two,
Yeah.
George, after the second one.
That was asking,
It
Why-
is like political.
why is your doctor son becoming more and more cynical?
I think that's a function of money on the part of a corporation that is constituted by a whole bunch of emergency room doctors and COVID. He went into ER partly because, and is at Martin Luther King completely because of his wanting to be a servant, a minister. And that's where poor people go for medicine when it's, gotten to the point where they've got to have something help, some help. And the corporation that is the container of all these ER docs is after money and wants to structure the whole thing in such a way that all of the people in that system, including the doctors, are producing money. On the other hand, when COVID hit and these guys began to work 10, 12, 14, 16 hours and he's at the UCLA Medical Center in Santa Monica. There are a lot of very wealthy people there. And when they come into ER, they are very, very entitled folks. And they demand and they yell and scream and want and spit and swear at the doctors when they don't get what they want. And then there are the poor who are just looking for help. And then there are the junkies who are poor and who are yelling and screaming that they need to have more drugs so that they can go back to their, semi-sleep. And when COVID hit with all of those elements there, it got absolutely crazy. And a whole bunch of the nurses have just quit, just left. And so doctors are needing to do for themselves what these helpers, PAs and others would do to help. And that's just worn him down. My wife, who's a marriage family therapist, like George, says he's in PTSD right now. And he
does too.
Pardon me?
Daniel does too.
Yes.
He recognizes
Yes,
that.
he does. And so he's begun to pull back and just refused to, every time something, they knew that if when there was a need, they could call him and he'd run and get there. Now he's not doing that. And he's looking at the three, actually the two, he's one of the three, two guys that are supposed to enforce this money-making structure. And he's now beginning to refuse to do that. And so he went from idealism to what he considered to be realism, and he's into cynicism now, and he realizes it, and he knows that it's a result of his PTSD, and he wants to pull back so that he can somehow balance, but he's not got there yet.
Well, and he still sees.
What's his name then?
Daniel.
Oh, okay.
Daniel Chavira, right?
Chavira, yeah.
MD, yeah.
Prayers.
Well,
He's one of my heroes, frankly, and that is, I mean, to this day, if they bring in a poor dying person, Daniel sees Jesus Christ.
He does, no question.
Well,
I have a son who's a doctor, and I wouldn't quite put it as strongly, George, but I think that he has a ministerial instinct as well.
Mhm.
He's in the Army, and he doesn't have that kind of pressure. He doesn't have that kind of
Good for
pressure.
him.
And when he was younger and chose a specialty, he chose pediatrics, knowing full well that he wouldn't make as much money there as he would in dermatology.
Yeah.
And as he got into the Army more and more, he saw that the need was, he got into adolescent medicine, which matches, 18, 19, 20-year-old soldiers.
Mhm.
And while all of those people in the Army have, a bed and 3 meals, they all come from different strata in society. There's poor people, there's people who've grown up with difficulties, the soldiers are, etc. And I noticed quite the opposite from cynicism. You know, when I talk to him, for instance, about transgenders, he talks about how he can help them and families deal with this, especially in an environment like the Army, where the pressure could be even stronger than it is in the larger thing. So I think that the doctors like your son are put into a situation. And the other piece is doctors in the Army like it, even though he's not a military type, like it because they can practice medicine. They don't have to spend their time in these kind of battles where how much money you make and how long you spend with the, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, you know, the kind of situation he in is really a bad one for someone with, you know, the real saintly type of instincts that he seems to have.
Frank,
I completely agree. Just real quick, George Ferrick, he says that Kaiser has is the medical structure of the future.
Yeah.
They don't let their doctors get stressed out. They measuredly give them patience. They give them time to spend with patients, et cetera. And that's a really good environment for them. Anyway, George, go ahead.
You know, Ned, just very
George
quickly,
Ferrick is really trying to get a word in edgewise forever, ever and ever. George, Ferrick, go for it.
Okay, and I'm going to ask for your help. I think there was a woman doctor back in the East Coast who committed suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember? And now there's a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
I forget her name, but it's
vaguely.
because of, it sounds like you have to help doctors and create policy that takes into account what you're saying, Ned, that Dan is experiencing.
Right.
Because she sounded like a wonderful person.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That was here in the Boston area, I think,
Yeah,
George.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and she was, and COVID was a huge element in that.
Yes, it was. It was. And her sister and family
Right.
are doing this foundation.
Yeah.
And I supported it. It was so touching reading about her, such a wonderful person that would feel so distraught, whatever, to take herself out of the scene.
Yeah.
Because of stuff that it sounds like Dan is experiencing.
Right.
So I just wanted to mention that. And I know Joe DeMasas has a son. Joe DeMasas is a year ahead of us, LA Sim, who's emergency doctor at Holy Cross. And, I think these doctors have really been under the gun, and there must be others who have committed suicide too. But it's really a very severe problem because they want to do good. They want to do good, and all this other stuff is happening. Yeah.
Was she a psychiatrist?
Of what?
I don't think so, Bob.
Because the highest, I remember an amazing class I had at Cal in the psych department in graduate school, the epidemiology of suicide, because this is a few moons ago, back in the late 70s, early 80s. But among the physicians, which are very, very high suicide rate, the psychiatrists were the number one MDs. And the only people higher at the time, and I think these statistics have changed, the only group higher than them were dentists.
I think that's,
Don't ask me why dentists, but I'm sure that data is different these days.
yeah, the dentist statistic have been true for decades. The dentists have an extremely high suicide rate.
Well, that's because they cause so much pain.
No.
They're going against.
Heck, my dentist, their former dentist, committed suicide, and I was just like, "What?" His wife was a partner of mine, and oh wow!
I think her name was Lorna Breen, and she was the director of emergency department at New York Presbyterian Hospital in Manhattan.
Wow.
Bob,
Frank Daly,
you have your hand up.
I have my hand
your
up.
son.
Bob Bonnot.
Bob has his hand
Yeah,
up.
before we close, I would just like to come back to the abortion thing and make some observations there. I don't want to interrupt this. but I'd like to make a few points that I find worthwhile for me at least. But I don't want to close this off before I.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Well, my thoughts are several. I think the church's teaching certainly doesn't support or specify or promote abortion. But I think to respect the dignity of each woman who becomes pregnant, they need to be encouraged, I think, to deal with their situation. But the discussion, the presentation, say, of a pastor, a meeting with a priest, should not be judgmental, but have to respect them and help them sort out their conscience, their decision, and to stand, in a sense, stand by them, whatever decision they make. So I think that's a first thing. Second thing that disturbs me about the whole question is it seems to me that the religious community, including a large part of the Catholic community, has wrapped itself around politicians, and especially the Republican, who has taken advantage of that whole thing to try to win.
Yeah.
And so they don't give a hoot about the dignity of the persons involved. They just want to be in control. And they've rallied the Catholic and the especially the evangelical community, I think, to wrap themselves around the Republicans, and this is what makes us a better nation. And it doesn't. It suppresses half of the population with their freedom to run their lives. Now, we're not talking about people that go around killing people, but so that's the second thing that it seems to me that we have to do. And then the third thing is, instead of standing and supporting this legal thing that is suppressing millions of persons in their judgment, in their decision about what they need to do to conduct their life, we, the Catholics, need to be supportive of them wherever they go with their decision. And thank God to Francis, it used to be if you had an abortion, you had to go to the Vatican to get forgiveness. I forget how many years ago, some of you probably know that was reversed, and they can go to any priest and have their confession and cleanse their soul and the rest of it. And I think that we need to be supportive of people who are trying to navigate their way through a very complex life, and to raise a family. For many people, they have to either, contracept or avoid pregnancy and all the rest of it. I think that we need to help people perhaps understand, you really don't want to get yourself pregnant. If you're all by yourself and you don't know what's going to happen, we should do all we can to avoid abortions, but I think we shouldn't separate from it. So I have a lot of dissatisfaction with where our church is standing, because it's lining up with that kind of authoritarian governance of people's lives. And I don't think the church should be authoritarian governors of people's lives, of people who have faith, who have love, who are trying to find their way through life and so the rest of it. So I find this thing very upsetting for myself. And I think our conversation has been very helpful to me. And I think the people that have their own conviction, let's say doctors. My father was an obstetrician, and he couldn't even think about contraception. And when I was ordained, he had a meeting with Fuchs, and it was a standoff because my dad said, you can't allow that. What's the terribly thing about avoiding a pregnancy? When persons say, I'm not ready for that. And, they shouldn't have sex, we can say, and all sorts of things along that line. So it just, I have not been able to get myself into a kind of a firm sort of position. I did a little Google here. Fuchs entered the diocesan seminary in Cologne in 31. He became a priest of that diocese in 37. He studied at the Gregorian, receiving licentiates in philosophy and theology, and that just went up above where it needs to be. And then he entered the German province of the Society of Jesus and received his STD from the Jesuit theologate at Falkenberg, Holland. So he was in Germany and was there a lot. After 4 years of parish work, he returned to study, receiving a doctorate in theology from the University of Munster. He taught moral theology at St. George Hochschule, and then was appointed to the faculty at the Gregorian at 54, and that was the rest of his basic career until he retired at the age of 70 in 1982. So I think that just kind of perhaps adds to our sense of Fuchs and where he came from and what he stood for and what he put out. And Bob, I think Bob, you and Fred know a lot more about him than I do. But and with my dad, it was a standoff, and he was saying that people, and I don't remember all the dialogue, but I know Fuchs was supporting the option of contraception, and as far as my father was concerned, he was a heretic.
How about that?
Bob, it seems like you were the ghostwriter for Pope Francis's talk to the bishops and priests of Canada, in which he called for a new pastoral imagination marked by listening, dialogue, and encounter.
Yeah.
But he's always been about that accompaniment.
But pastoral imagination, I think,
That's
is a rich
rich idea.
concept that needs to be really mined.
yeah, absolutely.
And
Complementary to reconciliation. I mean, that theme is just all around us. And that's what Jesus was a reconciler.
Yeah, because it seems like society's going in the opposite direction from pastoral, right?
That's when he says, in response, he's talking about the fact that someone has said God is, absent from the world. And he said the answer to that is not to say, isn't that terrible? It's to engage the world, to engage it with pastoral imagination, to reach out, etc., and to listen, that kind of thing. And, it seems to me, Bob, that's the first thing you said.
didn't he quote both Charles Taylor and Bernard Lonergan in that talk?
In that what?
In
The
that
one,
the talk that he was.
I didn't read the whole thing, Fred. I read a report of it in the.
Oh,
but
okay.
Well, go ahead. Tell us if that's true.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, could you send that talk?
I wouldn't kid you on that.
But
Didn't mean it that way. Anyway.
But how?
but Bob,
I know that.
Yeah.
But
Bob,
No,
go ahead.
look, Fred's,
Fred.
the doctors.
say again.
I could summarize it in saying, money talks and bureaucracies listen.
Yeah.
And the guys who are doing their job in the bureaucracies are getting screwed. Not so much in terms of money or anything like that, but in terms of their wholeness, their integrity as persons, the reason why they became doctors.
And that is among the areas in which Daniel has really stood tall. For how long has he been? When was he at Little Company of Mary?
I can't remember, George. 2003 or something.
I can't either. Yeah, it didn't turn out well, and
Now that's another
Just-
situation. He goes into this Little Company of Mary Catholic medical center, hospital, and very quickly it becomes evident that the 5 senior ER docs are corrupt with respect to medications and with respect to money. And at one point, he got involved, he was involved in a lawsuit. A doctor came in very dire straits and died. And the hospital and Dan were sued. And ultimately, I contend that the lawyers who were helping Dan, I think George Crook disagrees with me, but I don't think they did what I was able to get lawyers to do when I was senior deputy general counsel at this corporation. We had a lot of money to pay them, so they found ways to make complex issues simple enough for juries to understand and for the other side to realize, and then settlements would occur. In this instance, lawyers counseled Dan to give in because while he was correct, while he did nothing wrong, it was going to be too complex for a jury to understand, and therefore he ought not to take the risk of taking it to trial.
And what singular fact are you forgetting?
Well, a lie that was told by one of the witnesses who later recanted.
Not publicly, she didn't.
No, she didn't. She didn't, right.
Yeah, a nurse perjured herself against Daniel. It was just astounding to me.
Yeah.
I never understood why, but she admitted it.
But ultimately, they took that backing off that Dan was counseled to do and did to be an offense against the group that was there, and they jettisoned him. And it took him years to reacquire, to get back to the level of prominence that he is now in.
And again, this is a guy after whom they should already be naming hospitals, as far as I'm concerned. You know, and I know him well.
And so that also, Fred, and I didn't mention that, but that contributes to his look at the corrupt stuff in the world. And these five guys are still in charge of the ER at Little Company of Mary.
Oh.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, Daniel had no defenses against it.
It's so good to know that he has recovered himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's
Ned-
sobering to know that that's my hospital.
Well, you go to the ER.
And,
I may try to transfer allegiance to Torrance Memorial.
That's a good hospital.
That's a good.
And Ned, I have a reframe for you for Daniel. Instead of cynicism, he's in touch with reality.
Mhm.
He's too in touch with reality.
Yeah.
So a lot of his feelings are warranted. I wouldn't call him cynicism.
Yeah.
I remember years ago, I was with a priest and we were giving a retreat to priest in the Diocese of Worcester. We were at, God, I forget the name of the retreat house there outside of Worcester. Frank, do you know what? I forget.
No, I don't
I
know what
forget
you
what it was. But anyway, I remember I was talking to the priest who, he and I were a team working for a program called Emmaus. And I was saying, there's a period, for myself, I'm beginning to experience kind of a disillusionment with things. And he changed the word from disillusion to de-illusion. You begin to become more and more reality focused rather than being disillusioned. You're just seeing the reality of things.
Yeah.
That's kind of like what I think what you guys are saying, that your son is, being subjected to reality.
Yeah,
Yeah, but it's non-reality.
unreal.
There's no why for sin.
Yeah.
Why that lady would lie about him.
Yeah.
It never made sense.
It doesn't make sense. And he overcomes evil with good, which is the law of the cross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to throw one other thing out there, about what your son went through. We have two kids, twins, who graduated from St. Vincent's, brilliant kids, went to Notre Dame. One is now a professor there of engineering, and the other became a doctor and went into pediatric oncology. And he was in Los Angeles. I don't think he was I forget, but what made him very upset, and this, is the numbers of people during COVID that they were being stretched to the bone by people who refused to follow, the health recommendations until they're the ones who now come into the emergency room, and these people have to deal with them who did not take common sense precautions and everything. That was also a source of the kind of thing that these doctors have to go through.
Yeah, very explicitly, Daniel told me stories about that. People would come in and start raging at him when he gave them their diagnosis. And, there's no such thing. This is fake news, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, what would you then do, Daniel? He said, I'd admit him to the hospital and watch him die, over the next several weeks.
Yikes.
I was at a funeral last night of a 73-year-old gentleman who died of heart trouble recently. And I was talking to his daughter-in-law, and I said, so what happened here? And she said, he got COVID, and that's what took him out finally. Well, it means he wasn't vaccinated, right? Probably. Ethnic Armenian guy, businessman. Anyway, that must just be insane making to be a doctor and watch somebody die day to day when they could have had a shot and avoided it. It just must make you crazy.
True.
Let me take advantage of that pause and say we have gone our allotted 2 hours. And is it time to prayerfully bid one another adieu?
Mhm.
Thank you.
And let
Somebody have a joyful prayer to lift our hearts.
We need it. I do, anyway.
I have a good prayer. Let me get it just a minute.
This has been very helpful. I have to say, it just, it just helps to continue to clarify my mind about a lot of things. I mean, it's wonderful. It's a great conversation, and I look forward to it, but it just clarifies things, a lot of things for me. It doesn't solve anything yet. It just clarifies it, which is
Good call. I agree.
very important. Very important.
we are all stimulating.
Yeah, they are. Thank you.
Father Lawrence, are you going to lead us?
This prayer is from, as I understand it, the Scottish Book of Common Prayer. May he give us all the courage that we need to go the way he shepherds us, that when he calls, we may go unfrightened. If he bids us come to him across the waters, that unfrightened we may go. And if he bids us climb the hill, may we not notice that it is a hill, mindful only of the happiness of his company. He made us for himself, that we should travel with him and see him at the last in his unveiled beauty, in the abiding city where he is light and happiness and endless home. Amen.
Amen.
And
Thank you.
Thank you very
Ed,
much.
can you email
Thank
that?
you.
Yeah,
It's a beauty.
that's
Yes.
Oh, my Lord, what?
Yeah, Frank, send that Francis's statement to her, that article, whatever you referenced.
I think Tom just sent it.
Oh, he did?
I sent the text from the Vatican website for
Okay.
that
Thank you.
for that
Yeah.
speech,
thanks, Tom.
and it does reference both Lonergan and Taylor.
Taylor, yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
You.
Okay.
Peace.
Very
right.
much, guys.
Well, my uncle
God bless.
Joe.
Okay,
bless.
God bless you all,
Bye.
and